You know the old saying of it always takes two to tango? Well, it takes two to make a relationship work, and it also takes two to break a relationship. And one of the most unfortunate things that I ever encounter when it comes to that sort of thing is when I get couples who approach me because the one insists that the other needs to do some sort of counseling or therapy or something. And it's not that they're unwarranted or unjustified in what they think needs to happen from their partner's side, but what it is that there's this urgency to push, to say, hold on, I can see that there's a problem with my partner's behavior, and if only they would just listen to someone, we'd be able to get through this or make this life better, especially if there's children involved. Because when there's children involved, things take on a very different intensity and a different complexity in trying to resolve it, and the reasons why it's important to resolve it, and even what needs to be resolved, right? But that's a whole discussion on its own. The point is that often, and I say often because this has happened many times now, where I'll get one partner, and I'm not saying specifically the woman or the men, because it happens from both sides, and that's one of the things we need to stop, is looking at things from a gender-based perspective, because both genders are equally guilty and equally capable in many ways, and especially when it comes to maintaining relationships or building relationships, they both play a very critical part in doing that. And the moment you start reducing things like that to the gender roles, you then create more problems than you create solutions. Anyway, back to the point I was hoping to make it as an opening statement. The point is that if we look at how it is that people approach therapy, usually it's one of the two of them that is pushing to say we need help. And that's fantastic. It's good to realize when something is out of your control or something is out of your grasp to be able to figure it out. Which is another important point, is that when you get to that point of asking for assistance, you need to embrace the reality that if you had a good handle on how it needed to be solved, that you wouldn't need to reach out for assistance, right? Sometimes I get it that you need an external party because some people might be more receptive to an objective source, rather than it becoming a power struggle in the relationship itself about feeling as if you're just being put down or the other person is trying to put blame on you and things like that. So in that case, yes, a third party is helpful as well. But for the most part, we get to that point because we haven't been able to break that stalemate, that power struggle, that contention that exists between us and our partner. So when it gets to that, you get the person, one of them saying, let's start this coaching, therapy, counseling, whatever it is you want to call it, marriage counseling or whatever. Let's start this and see if we can work through this. And that's great. And often, hesitantly, the other partner, the second one, who wasn't the driving force behind this approach to therapy, they hesitantly engage. And in my experiences with couples like that, the second partner, the secondary party, so to speak, they start engaging and they start seeing things that, hey, hold on, I didn't consider it from that perspective, and yeah, you're right, I didn't realize I had that impact, and all of those sorts of things, right? And then they start actually opening up and they start engaging and embracing the reality of how it is that, okay, I have been kind of getting in my own way, or I can understand now why it is that I have the impact that I have on my partner and things like that. But that's when it gets interesting, because now you have that so-called problematic partner who's growing, right? Because that's what growth looks like. Growth looks like realization and conviction to want to do something with that realization, not to protect yourself from being wrong. That's not growth. That's hindering yourself. That's getting in your own way, right? So when one of the partners then embraced that growth, and the other partner who was convinced that they weren't the problem, this partner of theirs, this person that they're with, was the problem. And so that person is now working through it, right? And they're growing. Now the other partner, the one that initiated the contact, the one that initiated the process of let's get help, suddenly they're on the back foot. You know why? because their partner is now growing, and they didn't expect to have to be the ones to grow as well, because they thought they were okay. I'm fine, you're the one that's a problem, so you need to get help, but we'll do this as a couple for therapy because it's important for our relationship. And it's that kind of magnanimity, that benevolence that we have within us, that strokes our ego, that convinces us that we are doing the right thing for selfless reasons to make this great home and relationship and everything else. But most of the time we're not ready to accept that, hey, hold on, maybe we're also part of the problem. And that's where it gets difficult, because then you end up with the partner was more blatantly, overtly, kind of in your face, more problematic in the relationship, because they didn't realize how selfish they were being, or they didn't realize how insensitive they were being, things like that. And they then step up and they come to the table really like vibrant and ready to improve. But then the other partner is now on the back foot, like, I've been doing that all this time, so don't think that you're so special and you're doing such a fantastic job, because while you were in your space and everything else, this is how it affected me and all that. Then you're not invested in growing a life together. Then you're invested in trying to prove to your partner how it is that you were right and they were wrong. And that's where things fall apart. Is then the one that was a problem, supposedly a problem, outgrows the other one, and the person who started the process, they feel betrayed, they feel let down, they feel as if they're being discarded now. Oh, so now you think you're too good for me and all of that sort of nonsense, and you don't know how difficult it is for me, and you don't know what it is that I'm dealing with, and how it is that all of those years had an impact on me and all of that. That's not the problem to solve. The problem to solve is, how is it that you get along better as a couple so that you can move forward positively and grow together. And it's that growing together part that most people lose out on. Because often people who go for, I hate using these terms, counseling and therapy and all of these things, and coaching and all of that. I hate using those terms because it's really just about seeking understanding about why we are the way we are, why we are who we are. And when we start figuring that part out, you'll realize it's not about counseling or therapy, because nothing's broken. It's about lacking in understanding and awareness. And the more we improve our understanding and awareness, the more information we have to work with. And as a result, we just make better decisions, and we show up in a better, more positive way, more constructive way, because now we have more sense of self and self-awareness and mindfulness about what's the effectiveness of how it is that we're approaching something, or how it is that we're interacting with someone or dealing with something, so that we don't create new problems. We're actually sensitive to the person that we're with. So what happens then is that one or the other goes on this growth journey and they forget to take the others with them. Or someone sets up this trajectory to let's grow, and then they assume that the other person needs to grow more than them, so the other person outgrows them, and then they feel as if, oh, now you think you're too good for me. And that's what causes a problem then, because then you just took one problem and swapped it out for another problem. And that's why it's important that when we set out to want to be better, establish a better life, all of those sorts of things, we have to recognize that despite, and this is an important point, it's a really important point, despite not doing something wrong, what we were doing right will need to be taken to the next level. Because we're no longer dealing with a partner who was lagging behind, we're dealing with a partner who's now on par with us or even ahead of us in some ways. And the moment that becomes an uncomfortable feeling for you, you're not building a relationship, you're in competition. You're in competition to convince your partner that you're better than them and that they are not as good as you, or something along those lines. And that is a lack of self-awareness, the lack of self-esteem, where we measure our virtues against the virtues of our partners, and we measure our vices against the vices of our partners. That's not what a healthy relationship makes. So when we set out to want to build a good relationship, or when we want to remedy a relationship that's faltering, we need to be prepared to grow, even though we might not be the most problematic between the two in that relationship. And that's the part that's difficult for a lot of people to accept. because we become so defined by that struggle and those years of frustration and whatever it is, aggression and anger and everything that we felt, because we've been kind of pulling most of the load by ourselves, and we felt unsupported and invisible, and that our partner was insensitive to what we needed and all of that. All of that is true, but it doesn't change the fact that unless you're willing to put that in the past and see why it is that it couldn't have been differently, and now your partner is now in it with you to try to improve it, unless you can separate those two, you can put the past in the past and just recognize it, okay, we're going to do it differently in the future, and here's the substance, here's the reason why I believe we are sincerely looking towards building a better future. If you're not committed to that, then you become part of the problem, or you become the problem. And that's where most people go wrong, is that they're not willing to accept that they may have been part of the problem as well. And good people do bad things. Good people can also be oblivious, can also be insensitive and distracted. And for the most part, everyone is a good person at heart. They're just distracted by their demons and their gripes about the past and their childhood and everything else. And there's no shortage of people out there telling you that you can use that as a reason why it is that you don't have to show up the way you need to show up, because you don't know how difficult I've got it, and all of that nonsense. It doesn't matter what difficulty you had in the past, because if you're going to hold on to that as your reason for not being able to break through some of those demons and boundaries and barriers that you've created within yourself because of it, if you're not going to be willing to push beyond it, you're going to become defined by your past, and then you become the past that someone else is then dealing with, so that later on in life they look back and they think, you don't know how difficult I had it in my previous relationship, and then you become that person. How many people are blaming their parents for how it is that they are, not realizing that they are now in the same role as a parent, and they are being that parent that they're complaining about, they being that same parent to their own children. But because they do it differently, they think they don't have the same impact. We lack self-awareness, and we lack that conviction in holding ourselves accountable. That's why we end up making mistakes in life. Or we have blind spots, and we're not willing to consider that we have blind spots. And that obstinacy, that arrogance, that stubbornness, not to consider that, hey, even though we didn't intend to do something wrong, what we did was probably not the best solution in that moment. If we're not willing to consider that, and we keep needing to be sure that we're not the ones at fault, that our partner is the one at fault, and they need to make up for it, and they need to apologize, and they need to make right, and they need to reconcile, and they need to do all of these things that we need them to do, so that we can feel as if we now finally feel like we're seen and we heard and we feel justified and understood. You're not in a relationship then. Then you're looking to feel good about yourself. A relationship is about letting go of what it was that you thought was intended against you, when you realize that it was just the other person not realizing the impact that they had. Because that's one of the biggest problems, and I've repeated this many times in recent episodes, and I'll do it again. The biggest problem we've got is we don't realize what impact we have on others, because we focused on our intention. I judge myself based on my intention, but I judge you based on your action. Think about that. So when I behave a certain way, I know what my intention is behind it. So if you respond in a way that is not in line with what I expect, or what I think is fair, then that means there's a problem with you. Because I'm so focused on my intention that I'm not looking at the effectiveness of how it is that I'm carrying out that intention. And then I blame you for not showing up the way I need you to show up. And I blame you for not being appreciative of my efforts and everything else. We have to get out of our own heads. Because then when we look at the other person, we judging them based on their behavior, not on their intention, because we insert our assumption about what we think they intended based on how they behave, right? So if someone says they're trying their best, but you can see that they're doing something that is blatantly, obviously counterproductive, you, in your own right, can look at it and say, no, you're not trying your best. You're just being selfish, or you're being whatever. You're being obstructive, or you're being abrasive, or selfish, or whatever the case is. But in their mind, they don't realize that they're doing that. because they focused on their intention. And that's what we all do. That's a blind spot in relationships, in life. We're so fixated on what our intentions are, and we're defending our intentions, that we're not willing to be corrected about our method, about our way of going about doing things. And that's what builds a strong relationship. That's what builds good relationships across the board, not just in marriage or in the family unit. Across the board, we have to be willing to understand how someone is receiving our efforts relative to who they are. Because remember, if I want to have a certain impact, that impact I want to have is my accountability, right? I am responsible for making sure that the way I position myself relative to my audience, that I take accountability for that. So if I see that I'm putting forward a position that I believe is an important position for them to understand, if I'm putting forward a view or something or the other that says that, hey, this is what it is that you need to be aware of, then if they're not receiving it, I need to put in the effort to understand why it is that we have this miscommunication. I can't just blame them for not wanting to listen, right? I can recognize that they're distracted, and I can recognize maybe that I am not in a position to do something about the distraction, to influence them differently, because that's where you need that third party or someone else that is non-threatening or more neutral, so that they'll be more receptive to hearing that, okay, maybe they were misinterpreting it because they were projecting their own past or their own demons onto what it is that you're trying to get through to them about. But it doesn't take away the fact that I hold myself accountable for how it is that I am presenting myself. And then only once I've reasonably exhausted my opportunity to be able to come across differently, can I then say, no, hold on, you need to reconsider something else. But usually we're so quick to jump to the last step first that we don't realize that we hold others accountable for how we behave. I meant well, so that means you must receive it as if I meant well. The fact that I might have done something that was offensive or insensitive or embarrassing even doesn't matter. I didn't mean it that way, so you're not allowed to be upset with me. What nonsense. If we are truly sincere about wanting to be good people, good humans, then we must be willing to accept what impact we have on others and then decide what we want to do about that, right? But then the accountability for that decision, the consequences of the decision is ours. And that's one of the biggest things that people lose sight of again, is that they don't take accountability for the consequences of their choices, they only take accountability for the choice. So if you make me aware of the fact that, hey, you did something that was unkind, and I say, okay, I apologize for it, no problem, I won't do it again, and you sincerely won't do it again, but that moment of being unkind had an impact, and that impact resulted in the other person being angry, and that other person being angry and responded to you in a way that was less than optimal, that again confirms that they are responding to the impact you had on them. Now, do you accept accountability? Do you accept accountability for that consequence and allow them to express themselves before you tell them you're not that they should not be that way? Or do you shut them down because you already apologized? Accountability is something that we underestimate all the time, especially in relationships. Because accountability is what determines whether we feel valued or not. If someone accepts accountability for the impact they have on us or for the place that they occupy in our life, and they treat that with honor and with respect and with reverence, then we more likely will feel as if we matter to them, and vice versa. But because we don't look at it from that perspective, we're always focusing on what we need rather than what we give. We automatically assume that if someone doesn't reciprocate what we expect them to reciprocate, what we expect them to give back because we're doing so much, we automatically assume that that reflects what they think of us, not what they're grappling with themselves or what they might just be oblivious to because they don't see things that way or they're just not sensitive in that way. So when it comes to navigating and figuring out difficulties in a relationship, there has to be alignment of what problem are we trying to solve rather than who is the problem that we're trying to solve. And most people focus on who the problem is, not what the problem is. And yes, there might be a primary contributing partner or party in that issue, but that doesn't mean that that's the only contributing factor. It just means that that's what's actually bringing it to the surface. The underlying issue that was there already that made this become a bigger problem than it should be, that's something that no one really looks at. And that's what we need to spend more time on. We live in the shallow end of life, but we're all looking for depth. It just seems extremely selective and opportunistic. That everyone wants to have this amazing depth of life and experience and amazing kind of love that they have to share with their partner, but they're doing it in a very shallow way. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, we live very surface level. We're not willing to dig deep. We're not willing to look beyond the obvious and beneath the surface, because then, there's so many people that keep telling me, oh, but that's so deep and this so deep. And I'm thinking, but it's not deep. It's literally just scratching beneath the surface. It's literally just paying attention. But we don't pay attention because we're so focused on the aesthetic, and we're so focused on appearances, and we're so focused on protocol and decorum and how we expect others to show up for us, that we don't look at what's the deeper substance. Why are we even doing any of this in the first place? Why do we get married? Do we get married because we need someone to complete us? That's the most pathetic reason you can ever have to get married, because someone completes you. No one should be completing you. You should be a complete human who wants to complement someone else's life so that they can complement your life. You don't go looking to get someone to serve you. That's not what the point of a relationship is. The point of a relationship is to create something greater than the sum total of the two of you. So if you're in a relationship because you need to serve each other's needs, then that's shallow. It's absolutely shallow. And you'll run out of depth in your relationship very quickly because you're skimming the surface of life. Life is a lot more than that. It's got so much wonderment and amazement to offer, but people are just looking at, I want to travel and I want to have this aesthetic and I want to have that standard of living and that quality of life. No, that's a consequence of living meaningfully, living with depth and with conviction and with connection. Most people don't know how to do that because they're in such a defensive space about protecting what it is that they need from the relationship before they're going to be willing to surrender themselves and be vulnerable. Your willingness to be vulnerable to your partner is about you. It's not about your partner. And before you disagree with me on that, understand something. That even if someone has the propensity, has the inclination, or is likely to treat me in a way that is insensitive, me exposing or being available in a sensitive way is a reflection of what I believe I'm capable of dealing with. So if my efforts are not received the way I want it to be received, or it's mocked and ridiculed, whatever it is, I don't become defined by how it's received. I just recognize that either I'm doing something that is not connecting, or I recognize that where they're at, they're not ready to receive that. But it doesn't have to become a rejection of myself. It just becomes a problem with that specific effort, that specific interaction or dynamic of the relationship. But that requires depth and requires maturity to be able to discern, to be able to tell the difference between these things. And most people don't have that because they're so defensive. They're so focused on reaction and on claiming and on demanding and on fulfilling rights and responsibilities and obligations that they don't look beyond that. And that's the sad part of it all, is that most of life's problems can be resolved if you just connect at a human level first and then in your role. Unfortunately, these days, we only connect in the role. Most people look at the role that someone plays in their life and they hold them accountable to a certain standard or put them on a pedestal based on that role that they fulfill, and they don't see the human that has to fulfill that role. And that's why when someone missteps, we're so harsh in judgment and so intolerant in how it is that we respond or receive their efforts. That's why society is struggling. That's why our family units are struggling, because everyone is focused on what's the demand from them rather than what is it that they're contributing towards what they believe is important to achieve. we need to dig deeper within ourselves first if we hope to live a life of depth and substance. And if you're going around looking for relationships to just be a fulfillment of responsibilities and rights and duties, you're not looking for a relationship. You're looking for a contract. You're looking for a contract to make life more convenient and to hopefully leave some sort of a legacy because you've achieved certain things, not because you had a certain impact. And the expectation we have of ourselves is based on what we believe to be true about ourselves, not based on what other people think of us. So we can blame childhood trauma and we can reframe every unpleasant childhood experience as trauma. It's not going to change the reality of who you are as an adult and what it is that you can bring to the table as an adult. But if you're going to go through life being bitter and angry at your parents or previous generations, because nowadays it's epigenetics and 15 generations of trauma and all that nonsense, if you're going to buy into those things, all you're doing is you're looking for a reason why you are not accountable for who you are. And that's the tragedy of life. It's people who don't take accountability for who they are, they make the people around them responsible for how they behave. And as long as you're doing that, forget it. You're not going to have healthy, meaningful, deep relationships. And then you're going to grow more and more frustrated and more angry at life and at people around you, believing that no one gets you and you've got it worse than everyone else and no one understands how bad you've got it and everything else. None of that should actually factor into the quality of your relationship. That's self-pity, that's self-indulgence. That's not about living life. So you can go through life lamenting, regretting and wailing about how tough it's been. Or you can look at where you're at, who you are, and choose to do something about that and with that. Because of your conviction in wanting to be better, in wanting to rise above, in wanting to create something of value and of significance. Not because you think that the world owes you, or life owes you, or life is unfair, and that's why your partner needs to make up for everything that was unfair about your life. Or they must understand that because of certain things that you experience, they're not allowed to even go anywhere close to that because it triggers you. You're responsible for your triggers. You are responsible for your anger. You are responsible for your sense of self. And the moment you make anyone else responsible for that, you've lost. You've lost, not them. You've lost. Because then you are subject to how other people treat you. And anyone who is subject to how other people treat them, they never have peace. Ever. And maybe that's the really sad part, is that there are so many people who are convinced that peace feels like being loved and being accepted. No. Peace feels like you having reason to accept yourself and love yourself and appreciate yourself in a way that is meaningful and substantial, not this kumbaya affirmation nonsense. In a way that is substantive, something that has substance to it. Because you see the reality of your life, of your struggles, and what you're doing with it and about it. And how it is that you constantly striving, living curiously and living with conviction to want to keep getting better and better, because you compete with yourself, not with people around you, not with your partner, not with your peers or your colleagues or other family members. Because you want to hold yourself to a higher standard. Then you'll experience peace. Because then life becomes fulfilling, because you're now accomplishing things. You are rising in your awareness and your understanding and your connection and your conviction with life. Then you're an asset to society. You're an asset in your relationship. But if you need people to treat you a certain way before you're going to be a good human, then you're a liability. And liabilities, they weigh us down. They don't lift us up. They don't build us up. So if you want to operate as a liability in your relationship and you only do good because your partner is doing good to you, you're not being true to yourself and you're being unfair to your partner. And then if they respond in a way that is untoward or that is destructive or obstructive, and you just blame them for the way they're behaving and you don't look at your contribution towards setting the tone that is creating that environment in your home, then you're being dishonest. It's really as simple as that. You're not being true to yourself. You're not holding yourself to account for your contribution to your life. and you'll go through life blaming everyone and everything for how miserable you are. Meanwhile, you're literally an architect of your own misery. Own your life. I don't mean that in a philosophical way, in an ideological way, in a theoretical way. I mean practically, genuinely own your life. If there's something about it you don't like, do something about it. Look to understand why it is that way. Look to understand why it is that something that should be simple, you're struggling to actually accomplish, or you're struggling to not find yourself in the same cycles again. If you see you're attracting the same kind of people, attracting it, law of attraction, well, it's not because you're attracting it, it's because you are keeping yourself focused in familiar spaces. So you're only going to find the same kind of people in those spaces. That's how it is. That's how our sense of self, if it doesn't grow, if it doesn't shift, if it doesn't move with realization and conviction, we'll keep going back to what is familiar that just looks different. But it feels safe. It feels familiar. It feels unthreatening. And then when we keep getting ourselves stuck in the same rut every single time, we think, this is fate. Wasn't meant to be. That meant to be story, it's probably one of the most convenient lies we buy. Nothing was meant to be. Everything requires effort, sincere, meaningful effort that is constructive and effective in what we're trying to achieve. And if you don't gauge, if you don't reflect on how effective you are in trying to achieve something, you'll keep blaming external factors in other people for why it is that you can't achieve it. So please, own your life, step up. Establish relationships of substance, not surface level duty, rights and responsibilities nonsense. That's not going to give you a depth of life or meaningful relationships or wholesome family ties and things like that. You have to move beyond that if you want more than that. Take care.